What if the leaders we admire most are simply the ones who've mastered the performance? What if the very traits that should disqualify someone from power are the same ones that help them win it? Across history, we see a troubling pattern. The people who rise to the top are often those least equipped to lead with integrity, empathy, or long-term vision. It's not a glitch in the system, it's how the system is designed to function. In politics, business, and even local communities, the loudest voice tends to command the room, regardless of substance. We reward confidence, not competence, decisiveness, not depth. And in doing so, we create leadership structures built on illusion, not merit. This isn't just a philosophical problem, it's a structural one. Because if our institutions consistently reward narcissism, deception, and surface-level charisma, then we've built ladders to power that bypass wisdom entirely. And the results? Predictable instability, corruption, and a public that feels increasingly betrayed. But recognizing the pattern is the first step to changing it, because once you see the illusion, it's impossible to unsee it. Richard Nixon didn't stumble into power. He fought his way to the top with grit, cunning, and relentless ambition. But the same traits that helped him ascend, paranoia, moral compromise, and ruthless pragmatism, eventually triggered his downfall during the Watergate scandal. He was intelligent, experienced, and strategic. But he also viewed leadership as a battlefield where enemies lurked everywhere, and the rules could be bent for the sake of victory. And in doing so, he proved one of Machiavelli's oldest truths. Power obtained through deception is always at risk of collapsing under the weight of its own lies. Nixon's story is a chilling reminder that competence isn't enough. Without integrity, intelligence becomes a tool for manipulation. Without trust, leadership becomes fragile, no matter how formidable it looks from the outside. His rise and fall serve as a blueprint of how modern systems reward short-term wins and punish long-term vision. And perhaps more disturbingly, how society often only questions leadership after the damage is done. Men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, wrote Machiavelli. Centuries later, that statement remains disturbingly accurate. We are more influenced by how leaders appear than by who they truly are. It's not truth that wins, it's the illusion of strength, clarity, and control. In leadership, perception isn't just part of the job, it is the job. The ability to project confidence, charisma, and decisiveness can often outweigh deeper traits like competence or ethics. Leaders who master this illusion rise faster and fall less often, not because they're better, but because they look the part. Modern psychology confirms what Machiavelli saw. Our brains are wired to respond to appearances. We trust attractive people more. We follow confident speakers. We believe those who look like leaders, even when the data says otherwise. So what happens when the people best at projecting power are the worst at wielding it responsibly? We get systems that look functional until they collapse. And we get shocked, even though Machiavelli warned us hundreds of years ago. Why do we keep mistaking confidence for competence? It's not just cultural, it's psychological. Studies show that individuals who display high levels of confidence, even when they're wrong, are consistently rated as more capable than those who express caution or uncertainty. This creates a paradox. The more self-doubt you have, which often comes with intelligence and ethical reflection, the less likely people are to trust you as a leader. Meanwhile, the overconfident and sometimes clueless rise by projecting certainty in the face of complexity. It's the classic lost in the woods scenario. Two people step forward to lead. One says, "I'm not sure, but we'll figure it out." The other declares, "Follow me. I know the way." Most people choose the second, as not because it's smart, but because it feels safe. And this illusion of safety is dangerous. It rewards bold performance over thoughtful leadership. And once we start equating volume with value, we open the door to a generation of leaders who are better at pretending than performing. In a perfect world, leadership would be based on competence, ethics, and vision. But in reality, the traits that help people get leadership positions are often the same ones that make them terrible leaders once they're in charge. Narcissism, manipulation, bold promises with no substance. These qualities impress in interviews, debates, and pitch meetings. They signal strength, ambition, and certainty, even if none of it is real. And the system is designed to reward them. A massive meta-analysis across 54 studies confirmed this. Narcissists rise faster because they look like leaders. Their self-presentation, charming, confident, and ambitious, is exactly what hiring panels and voters are unconsciously looking for. But once in power, the cracks show. Their companies become unstable. Their decisions are erratic. Their teams suffer. The very qualities that made them rise are the ones that eventually bring everything down. Yet the cycle continues, because the game keeps rewarding the wrong traits. Adam Neumann didn't just sell office space, he sold a dream. With flowing hair, spiritual buzzwords, and bulletproof confidence, he convinced some of the world's most powerful investors to value WeWork at $47 billion. Despite hemorrhaging money at an unsustainable rate, his charisma was undeniable. He spoke like a visionary, projected absolute certainty, and made people believe he was building something bigger than business, a movement. But underneath the performance, the numbers didn't lie. Losses piled up, and basic fundamentals were ignored. When reality finally caught up, the company's valuation collapsed by over 80%, and Neumann walked away a billionaire, leaving thousands of employees and investors in disillusioned chaos. It was a masterclass in how style can overwhelm substance, at least temporarily. The tragedy is not just in what Neumann did. It's in how many people enabled him, because once again, confidence proved more seductive than caution. And in the leadership marketplace, bold illusionists often beat careful builders. If someone stood in front of you and admitted they weren't 100% sure, would you still follow them? Most people wouldn't. In times of uncertainty, we're wired to seek those who speak with clarity, even if that clarity is false. That's the trap. Research shows that we consistently reward leaders who project confidence even when they're wrong. We assume certainty means competence, and we punish those who express doubt, even when that doubt reflects deeper thinking and honesty. This isn't just a flaw in individuals, it's a collective blind spot. When society elevates confidence over caution and charisma over complexity, we incentivize the wrong kinds of leadership. The traits that win elections or promotions aren't the traits that build stable, ethical organizations. It's a painful realization. We may be our own worst enemy when choosing who leads us. Until we learn to separate truth from theatrics, we'll keep mistaking loudness for leadership and paying the price for it. Not all leaders follow the Machiavellian script. Seretse Khama, Botswana's first president, led not with bluster, but with integrity, humility, and a deep commitment to building strong institutions. And the results speak volumes. Under his leadership, Botswana transformed from one of Africa's poorest nations into a model of economic stability and democratic governance. While neighboring countries slide into dictatorship or chaos, Khama focused on long-term development, transparent policies, and shared prosperity. He didn't build a personality cult. He didn't make grandiose promises. He simply delivered and governed with a steady hand. By resisting the ego-driven temptations that seduce so many in power, he created something far more powerful: trust. Khama proves that there is another path, one where moral leadership and national progress go hand in hand. His legacy is a reminder that humility isn't weakness. It's the foundation of lasting strength. Machiavelli's most infamous idea, that successful leaders often rely on deception and are appraised for it. But he wasn't glorifying lies. He was simply describing how the game is played. And centuries later, not much has changed. Modern leaders don't tell outright lies. They use strategic misdirection. They distract you with drama, inflate minor wins, and spin every failure into a future opportunity. They know you're not watching closely, so they curate what you see. It's like watching a magician. While one hand waves in front of you, the other is doing theatric. And when it works, it feels real. Because perception is often more powerful than reality, especially in politics, business, and media. The dangerous part isn't that leaders deceive us. It's how easily we allow ourselves to be deceived, because we want to believe in certainty, progress, and hope. And anyone who can deliver that, or seem to, becomes dangerously persuasive. In the age of information overload, leadership has become a performance art. The most effective leaders aren't necessarily the most capable, they're the best at managing attention. They know what to highlight, what to hide, and how to shape narratives in real time. This isn't always malicious. Sometimes it's just survival. When everyone's watching and judgment is constant, the line between strategy and manipulation blurs. Leaders aren't rewarded for being accurate. They're rewarded for being convincing. But the line matters. Because when leadership becomes a magic trick, we lose sight of reality. Real problems are buried under spin. Critical decisions are reduced to optics, and long-term consequences are ignored in favor of short-term applause. Machiavelli warned us, in the absence of accountability, the appearance of leadership becomes more valuable than leadership itself. And in today's world of headlines and hype, that warning feels more relevant than ever. We like to think of ourselves as rational, but when it comes to leadership, we're far from it. Studies show that we suffer from what's called optimism bias, the tendency to interpret information in a way that aligns with our hopes, not our reality. And that makes us easy to manipulate. Leaders know this. They craft messages that resonate emotionally, not logically. They frame challenges as opportunities, spin failures as stepping stones, and exaggerate success stories. And we buy in. Not because we're foolish, but because we're human. This bias creates a powerful advantage for those willing to exploit it. Leaders who speak in uplifting tones, promise bright futures, and avoid uncomfortable truths gain loyalty faster than those who are honest but uncertain. The packaging becomes more important than the product. The result? We get leaders who tell us what we want to hear, rather than what we need to hear. And unless we recognize this bias in ourselves, we'll keep mistaking hopeful rhetoric for real leadership. Can honesty survive in a world that rewards illusion? Patagonia says yes. Under founder Yvon Chouinard, the company took a radical approach. Admit your flaws, show your impact, and tell the truth, even if it costs you short-term profits. Instead of hiding behind slick ads, Patagonia launched a campaign telling customers not to buy their products unless they really needed them. They exposed the environmental damage caused by their own manufacturing process. And the response? Loyalty, trust, explosive growth. Between 2011 and 2020, the company's revenue climbed from $295 million to $1.5 billion. Customer retention surged. Their transparency didn't weaken their brand, it defined it. In an age of performative ethics, Patagonia offered something rare: authenticity. This example shows that honesty isn't just noble, it's strategically smart. When you lead with truth, you don't just sell a product, you build a movement. And in a world drowning in deception, truth is disruptive. Deception doesn't always start with the audience, no, it often starts with the leader. A 2023 study found that people in positions of power are 42% more likely to engage in self-deception. The more power they gain, the more they believe their own hype. This creates a dangerous feedback loop. Leaders become convinced they're always right. Their team stops challenging them. Their ego grows. And over time, they lose touch with reality, not because they lied to others, but because they lied to themselves first. That's how cults of personality are born. The leader's self-image becomes untouchable, and any dissent is framed as betrayal. Organizations stop growing. Blind spots multiply. Crises erupt, and no one saw it coming because no one was allowed to. The worst part, these leaders are often more persuasive precisely because they believe their own myths. Authenticity, even when delusional, is magnetic. And the more we admire certainty, the more we enable the very leaders who've lost touch with the truth. Ever heard someone say, "I'd vote for the guy I'd have a beer with"? That's not just a joke. It's a psychological bias with real consequences. We're drawn to leaders who feel relatable, even if they lack the depth to govern effectively. This is known as the pratfall effect. People who appear slightly flawed or informal often become more likable, especially if they're already seen as competent. It explains why folksy, down-to-earth candidates outperform more polished intellectuals. George W. Bush leaned into this, adopting a casual speaking style despite his elite education. It worked. He connected with voters on a personal level, even when his policies were divisive. The same dynamic plays out in business, media, and everyday workplaces. The danger. We confuse simplicity with clarity. We elevate charisma over competence. And in doing so, we often reject the leaders we need because they don't match our emotional expectations. Good versus evil. Problem and solution. Leader and villain. But leadership, real leadership, rarely fits into neat little boxes. And the more complex the problem, the more dangerous it is to settle for a simple answer. This is what psychologists call cognitive closure, the desire for definitive answers in the face of uncertainty. When we feel overwhelmed or threatened, we flock to anyone who can give us quick clarity, even if it's false. That's why populists thrive during crises. They offer bold promises and clear enemies. They cut through nuance with slogans, not strategies, and we follow, not because the answers are right, but because they feel right. The result is a leadership environment where clarity is rewarded more than truth, where those who simplify rise faster than those who reflect, and where the leaders best suited to handle complexity are drowned out by those who pretend it doesn't exist. Leadership often demands hard decisions, but what happens when power itself makes it easier to ignore the human cost? Research shows that individuals in high-power positions exhibit reduced activity in brain regions tied to empathy, particularly when witnessing others in distress. This isn't necessarily about cruelty. It's about cognitive overload and emotional detachment. Just as a surgeon must remain calm while cutting into a patient, leaders may suppress their emotional reactions to make difficult decisions. But over time, that detachment can evolve into indifference. Machiavelli hinted at this when he said it's better to be feared than loved, not out of malice, but because excessive empathy can paralyze leaders. Leaders who feel too much may hesitate when firmness is required. And in high-stakes environments, hesitation is often punished, but when power dulls empathy, it also erodes trust. The best leaders aren't the ones who feel nothing. They're the ones who feel enough to care but stay clear-headed enough to act. Lose that balance and you either become heartless or helpless. We're taught to value honesty, humility, and kindness, but in competitive leadership environments, those same virtues can backfire. When you're too honest, you're seen as weak. Too humble, and you're dismissed. Too kind, and you're easy to exploit. Machiavelli recognized this centuries ago. He didn't say virtue was bad, he said it had to be flexible. A leader must appear virtuous, but also know when to break the rules. Because in the real world, rigid morality often loses to strategic adaptability. Angela Merkel's leadership during the refugee crisis demonstrated this balance. She led with compassion, but also managed political backlash, economic strain, and national security concerns. She didn't abandon empathy. She wielded it strategically. The most effective leaders aren't purely good or bad. They're wise. They understand context. They read the room. And they know when virtue serves the mission and when it must be tempered to protect the greater good. What if leadership wasn't about dominating, but about serving? Robert Greenleaf's servant leadership model flipped the power dynamic. True leaders, he argued, put the needs of others first. And companies like Costco proved it works. Under Jim Sinegal, Costco paid wages far above industry standards and offered health coverage to 85% of its employees, more than double the average. The result? Loyalty, low turnover, and 300% stock outperformance over Walmart during his tenure. Servant leadership isn't soft, it's strategic. By investing in people, you build a culture of trust and high performance. And by decentering the leader's ego, the system becomes more resilient, adaptable, and sustainable. In a world full of power-hungry narcissists, the servant leader stands out, not by shouting louder, but by listening better. And when they win, they take everyone with them. We often look for the right person to lead. But what if that's the wrong question? What if their solution isn't better leaders, but better systems that guide them, constrain them, and hold them accountable? The Venetian Republic had a fascinating model. Leaders were selected through a mix of elections and random draws to prevent any one faction from gaining too much control. Ancient wisdom, designed to prevent modern corruption. Today, companies like Bridgewater Associates use radical transparency, where even the CEO's decisions are open to critique by the entire staff. It's not about trusting one great leader. It's about building structures that prevent abuse and amplify accountability. Good systems don't just survive bad leaders, they correct them. And that's the future of leadership. Less about charisma, more about checks and balances. Machiavelli's metaphor is as powerful now as it was 500 years ago. A prince must be both a lion and a fox. The lion represents strength, the ability to stand firm against threats. The fox represents cunning, the ability to detect traps before they snap shut. Most leaders lean too far in one direction. They're all raw, no strategy, because are all tricks, no backbone. But real leadership demands both. It requires moral courage and strategic intelligence, and the wisdom to know which to use and when. This duality isn't just a political tactic, it's a personal practice. To lead well is to be adaptable, observant and grounded in principle. It's to balance conviction with curiosity, power with empathy, and action with reflection. Because in a world full of performers, manipulators, and short-term thinkers, the leader who can see through the game and still play it with integrity is the one who truly earns the crown.